What's up, Gear Mortals? Trey Xavier here. Today, I want to explore this new and kind of wild idea that you can run your entire in-ear monitoring system, your wireless IEMs, over Wi-Fi. It's not actually all that weird. I mean, come on, we're living in the future. Shouldn't we have some alternative to ye old radio wireless system? Like, come on. So this company called Audio Fusion got in touch with me, and they make an app called Soundcaster that is for this specifically. And they claim that 5G is so robust and powerful and reliable that you can run your whole IEM rig off of it, no problem. And it's actually way cheaper, like way cheaper than getting a whole traditional IEM system. So they think that this is the wave of the future, and I am incredibly skeptical, but I also like to think that I'm very open-minded, and I always want to try whatever the new bleeding edge technology is. So I told them to send me their stuff to try, and they were like, all right, we're gonna send you our hardware. And I opened the box, and this is what it was. And I was like, dog, that's a Wi-Fi router. What the hell? I was, of course, expecting some like wild, new, futuristic, proprietary stuff. But apparently the way that it works is, the thing that they make is this app that allows you to run your whole IEM system off of your laptop, but you have to have a really good router, and then you plug your in-ears into your iPhone, and your iPhone is the receiver. So the first thing that I decided to do was to poll a bunch of my friends who are professional live sound engineers to ask them what they thought of this idea. Now keep in mind, none of them have actually used this technology. This is just me describing it to them and seeing what they think of the idea. Christopher, hello, it's your grandma. I'm calling you to say hello and see how you've been doing. You'd have a cool grandma. Have you ever heard of the possibility of doing IEMs over Wi-Fi?
Yes, I have heard about that.
You have heard about it?
Not a lot, but yeah, I've heard people talking about it.
I definitely haven't used it. I don't think I've heard of it either. I don't think so.
Oh, well, I've used wireless mics with Wi-Fi, and that's just a total hellscape. That sounds very interesting, so I'm curious to see what you think.
No, it sounds like a terrible idea because of latency and the fact that 2.4 and 5 gigahertz are so underregulated.
What would your primary concerns be?
Mostly just like interference. I would just be very cautious that people might have access to that.
I'd be concerned about latency and audio compression. Those would be really the two major components in this. And then, of course, interference.
As a monitor guy, we're always worried about latency. Like, everyone says, why do you run 96K on your console? Why don't you run 48K? Chops the latency in half, you know?
The first thing I think of is the latency. If you could get the latency down, I think it could work really well. I've never seen a band do it or try it.
Well, tell me more. Tell me more.
Sure, I'm super into it. That seems like a really cool idea. Like, as soon as you told me it's like, oh, your phone's the actual receiver and you don't have to buy, like, independent packs and stuff, I was like, whoa, this is brilliant.
All right. Dedicated channel, dedicated Wi-Fi connection. Yeah, those are kind of the only two issues I would have is latency and audio compression, like how it's being sent over. But beyond that, sounds kind of cool.
That's really cool. I think it might be a little difficult to include it into a setup where you're trying to get like a full mix off of the stage, like how that connects. But I would just have to see how it works, you know?
So all that sounds pretty good in theory, but is it actually going to work? As always, there's only one way to find out. So now you've heard what I think about the idea. You've heard from some working professional sound engineers. Let's see what it takes to actually get a setup like this going on. You're gonna need some kind of a computer setup, probably a laptop, definitely a Macintosh, okay? This is only for Apple right now. There's not a Android, PC, Linux, whatever version. It's all only Apple right now. Anyone that you want to be connected to the system is of course going to have their own set of IEMs. It doesn't really matter what kind. That's gonna be up to you. I've got some Ultimate ears. And of course you're going to have either an iPhone, an iPod Touch, or an iPad, and it has to be an iPhone 6 or newer, otherwise it's not gonna work. On the computer that you're using, you're gonna have the Soundcaster app, which is free. What you're paying for is the connections for each individual musician, okay? The software is the thing that Audio Fusion actually makes. Any member of the band who wants to be able to use the system has to also download the Performer app, which is sort of the sister app to the Soundcaster app. And then, so it's $100, it's a one-time fee, and that's the entire cost, basically, aside from the actual router. Presumably, you already have this other stuff. You're also gonna need some kind of an interface, which once again, if you're running a professional rig, you're probably already using. I'm using the X32 right now. And then of course, if you're using any kind of playback, clicks, backing tracks, cues, anything like that, you're gonna need to use a DAW of some kind, or any kind of playback program that you're using. There's a number of them. We're using Pro Tools here. So normally what I would do is get the band together, we would, have a rehearsal basically, and we would test this out. But of course, we're in the middle of a friggin' pandemic, apocalypse, whatever, and even if I could get the band together, we can't rent a rehearsal space right now. So I've had to get kind of creative, and I'm just using Pro Tools with all of the stems, and we're gonna pretend like each of these stems is a member of the band, and I've routed them all as if I was playing with the dudes in real life, and then I'm gonna be the live element, basically. It's not ideal, but like I said, it's the best we can do for what we've got. So if we take a look at the Soundcaster app, you can see that we've got 32 available channels, and that's because I have selected from the list of input devices the X-USB, which is the X32 interface. But the Performer app can only handle 16, which is still a ton. On the Performer app, you can take a look at each channel. You can pan it left or right. You can turn the volume up and down. You can solo it. You can mute it, and then there's a little yield sign, and I don't know what it does. So right now they're just numbered, but if we take a look, for example, I've got the bass coming through. Right? So I'd go and take a look and see where the bass is. And in the Soundcaster app, we're on channel 3. I'm gonna call it bass. And then we go back over to the Performer app, and it's been updated. So you go through before your show and you label everything so that each of the performers will just have a little name for what each one of them is, and they go, oh my God, the bass is so loud, so you can go in and turn it down. Or they're like, I wanna hear the bass panned all the way to the right. I don't know why you would do that. There are a number of things that you have to do in order to optimize the quality of the connection between the computer and the phone, okay? If you don't do all of them and really get good at it, it's not gonna work. It's kind of a pain in the ass. I learned way more about routers than I ever thought was necessary or possible. You have to go in and change tons of settings inside of this already complicated and powerful router. And then there's just a couple things that you have to remember to do on the laptop and on the phone. For example, if you download a Wi-Fi scanner like this program, Wi-Fi Explorer Lite, which is free on the App Store, you can see all of the Wi-Fi signals in your area, where they sit within the Wi-Fi spectrum, how strong they are compared to the router that you're using. And then you can go into your router and change a bunch of the settings to optimize it for the area that you're in and what kind of signals you're sort of fighting with. That's a lot of upfront work that you have to do to get it all set up and working. And then at any venue that you're going to play at, you're gonna have to go in and do a little bit of this just to optimize for that particular area, because right now I'm sitting in a garage in the suburbs, so there is Wi-Fi everywhere. This is not an ideal place to do something like this. But once you do that, the connection so far for me has been really strong and crystal clear. So now I've got it all routed and labeled. I only used 10 tracks, actually. You might use more because we're using stereo drums here. It's just a stereo stem of the entire drum kit. So you might use up all 16 pretty easily. And once again, this is gonna depend on how many people there are in the band, how big of a band you've got, or whatever. You might have to get a little bit creative, but 16 is still a ton. You get to choose which 16 you actually wanna use. So you can just go in, and with this little button at the bottom, you can activate or deactivate any of these other ones. So like it doesn't have to be 1 through 16 that you're using. And each person in the band who has the Performer app has control over all 16 of those inputs, okay? So you get to have your own personalized little mix. You don't have to be doing one of these, you know. It's some guy who may or may not be paying attention. All right, let's give it a shot and see how it sounds. All right, hey. Now, I'm sitting immediately next to the router, so of course the signal is gonna be really good. Now we gotta try it with me walking as far away from the router as I can, and let's find out how far of a range this thing actually has. All right, so this is the test that I'm gonna be doing. It's the closest that I can get during this pandemic to playing a show. I'm gonna test the range of this system. Basically, I've got it set up in such a way that you're gonna be hearing what I'm hearing. So I've got a splitter coming out of my phone that's going into this Zoom camera, and that's where you're gonna get the audio from. So you're gonna hear it presumably at the same time as I do in approximately the same quality. Obviously, I probably have different in-ears than you do, and you're listening on your home speakers or whatever. But I wanna know things like, is there noticeable latency? Is there, any kind of dropout or anything weird like that? I've marked off 25-foot distances, and you're gonna be able to see as I pass by them, and we've got it marked off all the way up to 100 feet. That's all the way down this driveway, and it's, not perfect or ideal, but this is gonna give us a pretty good idea of what kind of a quality you can expect. So here we go. Wish me luck. Five feet. Important. was a hell of a test. So much happened in such a short period of time. I am very surprised to report that the range of the Wi-Fi in-ears is greater than that of my guitar's wireless pack. I was really honestly not expecting that. At first I thought I was getting dropout from the in-ears, and then I realized it was just my real-time guitar. It gave out a good 20 or so feet before the Wi-Fi in-ears. And all of a sudden, my view on this whole thing has changed drastically. Supposedly the range on this router is about 150 feet. I can't even get 150 feet away from this setup without being in the middle of the street. This is why we do real investigations and not just say like, well, this is what the manufacturer says it could do, because even though it's less than supposedly it's supposed to do, taking a look at how long 150 feet actually is, that's 150 feet in either direction. I've played in front of 20,000 people at a stadium in Frankfurt, and the stage wasn't even nearly that big. That puts it in perspective for me. I am all of a sudden extremely impressed. All right, now the only thing that's left to do is my conclusions. So now the moment you've all been waiting for, the conclusion. What do I actually think of this? Is running your in-ears over Wi-Fi actually a viable technology? And you'll probably remember that from the beginning of this video, I started out incredibly skeptical of this idea. I mean, it's pretty wild. In the course of this investigation into this idea that I did, I had to spend a lot of time learning a lot about Wi-Fi. And if you want to try doing this kind of a rig, you are going to learn a lot about Wi-Fi too. You have to become something of an expert in the field of Wi-Fi to make this happen. But what you got to keep in mind is that this is brand spanking new territory. And as with any emerging technology, there are what I would like to call advantages and hassles, okay? The same way that you're gonna have advantages and hassles with ye old traditional radio transmitters and receivers for IEMs. So I'm gonna go over all of the ones that I encountered or thought of while I was doing this whole testing process, and hopefully that's gonna help you to decide whether or not this kind of setup is right for you. But I wanna start off by saying that really the answer is yes. I think this is absolutely a viable technology. I think that it, of course, has a lot of room for improvement because it's brand new. And in the same way that the traditional systems, you know, when they started out, there was all kinds of things that they could, that they needed to improve and are continuing to improve to this day. And those kinds of systems have decades on this Wi-Fi technology. So, you know, there's stuff like, I mean, they have physical units. This one that I use for my guitar has a little thing you can plug the battery right into it, and it charges inside of the unit, okay? That's just one improvement that they thought of after, you know, 50 years or whatever of using this technology. Of course, the number one advantage here is that using a Wi-Fi system like this is literally a fraction of the cost that you would spend on a traditional system. The kinds of transmitters and receivers that we use, the traditional ones, for my rack, for my band, are about $800 per person if you have a dedicated transmitter and receiver for each person. So that means if you have 5 people in your band, the traditional system will cost you $4,000, whereas the Wi-Fi system, if you have 5 people in your band, it's $300 for the router plus $100 for each person, so that's $800 total. So that's a fifth of the cost. That alone should make you sit up and pay attention. Of course, that's assuming that everyone in your band already has an iPhone or an iPad that they can use for this and that you're already running your show off of a MacBook. It's 2020, and the likelihood that you're running your whole show off of a MacBook is pretty high already. I honestly can't think of many pro bands who aren't already using a MacBook as sort of the epicenter of their whole rig. Even if every single member of your band doesn't have an iPhone, you've got the one guy with the Android that makes the group text green text. Every band's got one. You can go to Walmart and buy a prepaid iPhone for $100, an iPhone 6, and you can use that. And almost even better, you can use that as a dedicated one, and it won't be like your phone that you're using all day and then it's your wireless pack. Which brings me to one of the things that I consider to be a hassle of this system, and that is that your phone is with you all the time, all day long, okay? And when you're on tour, your phone is your connection to the world, so you use it a lot. And when it comes time to play the show, if you go, oh shit, I used my phone all day and now it's on 5%. Whereas a dedicated pack is just sitting in the drawer and you pull it out and it's ready to go. And then of course you can replace the batteries if they're dead. Whereas with the phone, you better have one of those charger packs that's charged and ready to go as a backup. Otherwise, the show is screwed. You're boned. That sucks. That's a hassle. But one of the big advantages of using your phone is that this is both your mixer and your receiver, whereas this is just the receiver and you can't mix your in-ear mix on this. So when you're using this for both, it cuts this out of the picture entirely, whereas when we're using just these, we're already using these with the X32 to mix our in-ear mixes. So with the IEM system, you only use this. With the traditional system, we're using both of these. One of the concerns that my pro mix engineer friends had was about being able to see the Wi-Fi that's in the area and being able to put your signal in the right place, and how they typically will use an RF analyzer at any given show to figure out which bands have the most interference before they start, so that they can get on the cleanest channel and the best frequency spot and all that stuff. But it seemed to me that using Wi-Fi Explorer and setting up the router the right way solved that problem pretty quick. One of my main concerns, and something that I initially put on the hassle list, was this guy, the iPhone dongle. And you know, Apple took the headphone jack off of their phones, starting with the 6, which is the earliest one that you can use with this system. So no matter what, you're gonna be using one of these. And I was thinking, like, this is kind of janky to have this plugged into here and then to have your IEMs plugged into here. And I was thinking, like, doesn't that, you know, create kind of a problem? But what I figured out is that it actually takes the same amount of pressure to pull this out of here as it does to pull the dongle out of the phone. So I think if you just take some gaff tape and tape the dongle onto here, you're actually gonna have a pretty okay, robust connection. One of the concerns that I had with this system is the same reason that I avoid using a laptop in my rack, and that is that a laptop and a phone are extremely complex, powerful, but very prone to problems pieces of equipment, okay? While I was doing this test, I was, you know, in my garage, which has no climate control, and it got really hot, and the phone overheated and just stopped working. Now, that's something that any piece of equipment can do, including the laptop, but I've never had that happen to one of these, and I've never heard of that happening with this. This is just a super simple, dedicated thing, whereas this you have with you all day long, and you're doing everything on it. So I'm a little worried about the phone being a possible failure point, and also it being this thing that crosses over from your regular daily personal life into the on stage, you know, being dependent on it on stage. And whereas this, you know, you turn it on, you play the show, and then you turn it off and it goes back in the rack. You don't take it with you to the grocery store or whatever. It does its one thing and it lives in its one place. If you lose this during the day, you're screwed for the show at night. That sucks. It's possible that I'm mostly worried about this because I am a very absent-minded person and I tend to lose things a lot and leave them places. And if the whole show was dependent on this, then that's once again a possible failure, whereas this, I know where it is all the time. One really cool advantage of the Wi-Fi system is that it frees up all of your aux sends that you would have otherwise been using for all of those in-ear mixes, and it replaces them with the app. So that could be a huge advantage. That frees up all kinds of cool stuff. But then one of the hassles of using the Wi-Fi system is that you have to use a router. And if you've ever tried to set up a router just for regular old home internet, then you know the meaning of the word pain. once I got this one up and running, even though it was a bit of a learning curve and I had to become, like I said, a Wi-Fi expert, after that it was a breeze. You know, it's basically set it and forget it, as long as you don't have to reset the router at any point, because that will reset all of the settings, and then you're gonna be so mad. You're gonna be so mad. Once you get the hang of it, once you become a Wi-Fi expert and an expert in using the router that you're using, it's gonna be fine. Like, it's really not that bad. The number one biggest concern that I had, that my engineer friends had, and that I imagine you might have at home is the latency. Is there a lot of latency? You know, immediately you think like Wi-Fi. You're like, is the signal going through this? Is it bouncing off of a satellite and coming back? You know, is Sputnik holding on to the signal for too long before it shoots it back down? And it's nothing like that. The latency was completely unnoticeable to me personally. What you're hearing during the demo test part of this video is the click and the backing tracks coming out of Pro Tools, okay, going through the X32, going through the router, connecting to my phone, going into my ears, okay, and me playing, and the signal going from the guitar over the wireless to the wireless unit into the X32, then into Pro Tools, okay? And I couldn't tell that there was any latency at all, and you can hear that I'm playing in time, and it wasn't my greatest performance of all time on the guitar, but I was a little distracted. But it was perfect. As far as I can tell, there's as close to zero latency as is at least noticeable by a person, so I was incredibly pleasantly surprised by that. One other thing to keep in mind is that the main cost with this is purchasing the connections, okay? It's $100 per person. That's the thing that this company is actually selling, okay? They make the software, and you are buying into their ecosystem. That's locked to your Apple ID. You cannot resell those, unlike a piece of hardware, like just a regular old transmitter and receiver that I could sell on Reverb when I decide that I don't like it or whatever. You're stuck with this connection forever. So there's no resale value, but once again, the investment is way, way, way lower. So if you're not willing to bet $100 plus a $300 router on this, you know, just keep in mind that you're not getting that money back at any point. Something happened during the testing of this system that flipped my perspective on it so fast, I couldn't even believe it. You could probably see the shock on my face in the video. The shock that I felt was palpable, and that's that the guitar wireless dropped out completely about 20 or 25 feet before the Wi-Fi did. And that's something that I didn't think was gonna happen at all. I didn't think about this at all. I didn't consider that that was even a possibility out of all the possible options. It was like an M. Night Shyamalan plot twist I never saw coming. I paid good money for this system, and it works great, but I couldn't believe that the range was less than a Wi-Fi router. My view on the whole thing was absolutely shattered. Like, the way that I'd been thinking about it and looking at it was completely backwards and wrong. The company that makes this system, Audio Fusion, tells me that there are over 700 churches and bands using this system successfully without any major problems, and have been for over a year. And, you know, that's, of course, information coming straight from the company, but they came to me to do some independent testing, and I have done the best that I could possibly do given the circumstances that we've got with this global pandemic, not being able to play real shows or go on a tour and try it out in very real situations. You of course have to keep in mind that the tests that I conducted on this are pretty sort of sterile laboratory conditions. This isn't you sweating all over your phone at a venue that's a packed house. This is just in my garage, in the suburbs, in the driveway and sort of backyard of my house, and there's only so much that I can do right now. It's possible that the suburbs might be worse for Wi-Fi because there's routers everywhere. Every house, you know, placed 25 feet apart is gonna have a router, and there were tons and tons of signals on Wi-Fi Explorer that I could see. So I don't know if a typical venue in the middle of a city, or maybe is you know, in an area where there isn't quite as many routers per square feet, if it would be better or worse. Probably not as bad. I have been about as scientific as I can be reasonably expected to be, considering the fact that I am not actually a scientist of any kind. Keeping all of this in mind, I have to say that I was incredibly surprised at how well this worked. And it might be because I was so skeptical to start out with. And I have to say, I think it's cool. Like, we're at the beginning of this brand new thing. It's pretty exciting, right? The same thing that you use to send a text message, you can run your IEMs off of. It's like, this is some Star Trek shit right here. Like, what's next? Sandwich delivery over Wi-Fi? I really hope that that's what it is. As with any piece of gear, the most important thing is that you understand how it works, you understand what it's for, you understand its power and its limitations, and this is no exception. So if you're in a band and you can't afford or don't want to spend the kind of money that it would take to get a traditional IEM system like this, you should very seriously consider looking into using a system like this, because it's going to save you a ton of money, and it works as advertised as far as I can tell. So I'm going to go ahead and say super pleasantly surprised, very excited about this upcoming technology, and man, did I have a fun time investigating this. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hopefully this video has helped you decide whether or not a Wi-Fi IEM system is right for you and your band. And as always, if you haven't already, mash that subscribe button, smack the bell to join the notification squad. Drop me a like and leave a comment in the comments section letting me know whether or not you would trust your IEMs to Wi-Fi. And I'll see you real soon.